Hello, everybody, and welcome to my Arena Open guide for the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Limited Arena Open. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down all of the information you need to succeed in the Arena Open, but before I dive in, I want to remind you that if you enjoy this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel for more draft content, and comment below with your questions, thoughts, and feedback. Let's get started. In this video, I will be discussing the tournament structure. I will be giving a Neon Dynasty format overview. I will talk about sealed versus draft strategy, and I will talk about best of 3 versus best of 1 strategy. Let's start with the tournament structure. So, the basics are day 1 is going to be sealed competition, day 2 is going to be draft competition, and there is a max prize of $2,500 if you get the maximum payout. So, day 1, it's going to start at 6 a.m. Pacific time on 2/26, which is Saturday. It will end at 6 a.m. Pacific time on the Sunday, and the sign up ends at 3 a.m. Pacific time. So if you sign up before then, you have a little bit of time to finish your matches. Day 2, there is a sign up window between 6 and 8 a.m. Pacific time. You have to sign up during that window. You don't actually have to do your draft then, but you actually have to register and sign in during that time, and it won't let you do it after the fact. So please remember to sign in during that window. And then the event ends at 6 p.m. Pacific time that day. And you can finish matches in progress, but you can't start any new ones after that. So that is the times slots. In the day 1 sealed, it is best of 1 or best of 3 sealed. The entry is 5k gems or 25,000 gold. Based on this analysis, gold is a more efficient entry. If you use the fact that it costs 10,000 gold to enter a draft or 1,500 gems, it looks like you're getting a pretty decent discount if you are entering with gold. So if you've been saving up your gold, this is a great place to spend it. If you're playing best of 1, you are trying to get to 7 wins before 3 losses, and if you're playing best of 3, you're trying to get to 4 match wins before 1 match loss, and the rewards are as follows. For the best of 1, if you get to 7 wins, you get to day 2. 6 wins, you get 2,500 gems, so half of your entry fee. If you get to 5 wins, you get 1,000 gems, and then you get nothing for 0 to 4 wins. Best of 3 has a little bit more of a generous prize structure in terms of gem payouts. You get 5k gems for 3 wins, 3k gems for 2 wins, and 1k gems for 1 win, and then of course getting to 4 wins makes you to day 2, and you get nothing if you get to 0 wins. Looking at the day 2, it is all best of 3. There is no best of 1 option. You have to have a day 2 token to enter, and the goal is to get to 8 match wins before 2 match losses. The maximum payout is $2,500 for 8 wins. At 7 wins, you get $2,000. At 6 wins, you get 1,000. 5 wins, 25,000 gems. 4 wins, 10,000 gems. 3 wins, 7,500 gems. And 0 to 2 wins, 5,000 gems. So it may look like on day 1, you're not getting any gem payout for making it to day 2. It's like, oh, there's jumps from gems straight to day 2 qualification, but you do get those gems back if you do make it to day 2. That's like your minimum reward is getting those gem payouts. So, moving on to some probabilities. These are graphs that were made by legend of the game, Frank Karsten. He's a Magic the Gathering Hall of Famer. He's got a doctorate in math, and he does all sorts of cool stats things. I actually had the honor of playing against him in my very first Grand Prix that I ever played in. I did defeat him, so that was a pretty awesome moment for me. But enough about me. Let's get to the stats. This is graphs that are talking about the expected profit as a function of a game win rate, and then the expected number of games that you would need to make it to day 2 if you have specific win rates. It uses a binomial probability calculation, and it uses for its EV the fact that if you were to buy a maximum, the highest amount of gems for $100 or whatever, that's how much a dollar value of a gem is. So for calculating payoffs, because in order to do these calculations, you have to calculate the odds of getting every single individual payoff with your specific win rate. So and then adding all of those EVs together. And so these are what the data suggests. If you have a 52.7% games win rate, then your EV is going to technically break even, though that is assuming that you were able to play this event infinite number of times. And so the event is going to pretty much be staggered into, you're either going to make a lot or you're probably going to lose a little bit. So that's kind of how this sort of event is structured, because it is very top heavy. The main takeaway I think that the probabilities say is that if your goal is to qualify for day 2, at pretty much at every single win rate, best of 1 is going to give you a better chance of qualifying for day 2. So if you're looking for, should I play best of 1? Should I play best of 3? Best of 1 is going to give you the best chances of making it to day 2 and cashing overall, just because you're going to have higher odds of making it to day 2 to compete for the cash. So that's what these charts say. And then if you want to find more individual stuff, you can look up how to do binomial calculations. They're not actually that complicated for discrete values. But yeah, pretty interesting stuff. So, moving on to a format overview for Neon Dynasty. It's going to be a brief overview. I have plenty of draft videos, and I have a sealed video out, and I've got draft meta updates and a draft guide for this set. So if you really want to dive deep into the strategy, I have tons of content for you, but this is going to be a brief format overview. Starting off with the archetype tiers, I decided to group them roughly into low tier, mid tier, and top tier. At the top tier, we've got black, green, blue black, and green white. Black green is kind of a grindy mid-range deck, blue black is a ninjas deck, and green white is an enchantments deck. In the mid tier we have blue red, white blue, black red, green blue, and white black. Blue red is kind of an artifacts deck. White blue is kind of like a vehicles deck, but also just kind of plays a mid-rangey game. Black red is an artifacts deck that can use like sacrifice synergies. Blue green is a ramp deck that can often splash around or just play late game expensive creatures. And then white black is just a solid value deck that has a lot of strong cards, and some cards that care about enchantments, and some that care about artifacts, and some that care about both. And then in the low tier, we have red, white, and red, green. Red White is a Samurai's deck, but it's oftentimes just a little bit weaker than the other color combinations because it just doesn't have the quality of the payoffs or the quality of cards that it needs. And then Red Green, it's kind of a little unfocused, which is one of the reasons it goes into the low tier. It doesn't really have like a main theme or something to build towards, but it can get there if you get good enough cards. And so if any of these decks are open enough, you can certainly draft them, but these are just the basic archetype tiers. Moving on to the best commons, I decided to go with the best common for each color. The card that I think, if you see it, it could be a little bit of an indication that the color may be open. There are other commons that are quite good in these colors, and in many cases, there are 2 or 3 commons that are basically like equal in terms of power level, but I figured I would just keep this very simple. And if you are drafting and you're trying to read signals, if you see one of these cards coming around the table late, that could be a good indication that that color is open. So in white, we have Spirited Companion. In blue, we have the Modern Age, which flips into Vector Glider. And then in black, we have Twisted Embrace. Okiba Reckoner Rage is also a very good black common, but again, I was trying to keep this simple. Red has Kami's Flare, and then green has Master's Rebuke. And if you wanted a basic like color ranking, black and green tend to be the best, white and blue kind of a little bit after that, and then red is a little bit at the bottom of the pecking order when it comes to the colors. Moving on to things you should know about the format. There are tons of artifacts and enchantments, which means that artifact removal and enchantment removal is much better than it normally would be and is definitely main deckable, like a card that kills artifacts or enchantments. Sagas are also great. There are tons of new ones. There's ones in common and uncommon, and a lot of them are really powerful, so keep your eye out for those sagas. Splashing is easier than normal because gain lands are replacing the basic land in some percentage of packs, so you'll have more access to dual lands, and there's a decent amount of other fixing. Modified is mostly a support mechanic. If you are looking at the mechanic as, oh, I'm going to build my whole deck around it, it's not really going to work out that way most of the time. You're usually just going to have a couple of incidental cards that care about Modified. And then finally, you always need to keep ninjutsu in mind when you are in combat because your opponent can surprise attack you with a ninja if you don't block their creature, and so you need to be weighing that when you're deciding whether or not to block. Next up, we are going to talk about sealed strategy versus draft strategy. I have phrased this in the way, compared to draft, sealed is slower because you're not going to be able to draft a deck that is aggressive. You're not going to be able to fill out the key points in your curve. You're just at the mercy of what you open. It is going to have less focused decks for the same reason. You just open 6 packs, and so you're not going to necessarily be able to build the perfect artifact deck or the perfect enchantment deck. So the decks are going to be less focused. There are going to be more bomb rares in sealed because you're opening 6 packs, and then each player is going to try to be fitting as many of their bomb rares as possible into their deck, and so you're just opening 6 packs instead of in draft where you open 3. And sure, in draft you sometimes get past a bomb rare, but that doesn't happen all that often, and so usually you're going to have higher quantity of bomb rares in sealed. There's going to be more splashing in sealed because it's slower, so it gives people time to splash. It also lets people play more of their powerful cards and bomb rares and things of that nature, so there is going to be a little bit more splashing in sealed. It requires more scaling 2-drops. This is one of the more complex points I wanted to add, but basically if you have a 2-drop that doesn't do well in the late game, you don't really need to consider playing it as heavily because you don't need to play 2-drops to avoid getting run over because there aren't as many aggro decks, and so you can afford to play just your premium 2-drops that are going to be fine top deck slates. So things like that have evasion or things that are going to help have like an activated ability that you can use, things of that nature. Those 2-drops are much more important, so you can actually get away with having a deck that only has like 3 2-drops in it or something like that because the format is slower. And then finally, sealed requires you to save your removal more for those key threats, for those bomb rares. You're able to take a little bit of extra damage in the early game, really leverage your life total as a resource in those situations so that you have your removal spell at the ready when your opponent plays their bomb rare. So those are just some tips for sealed if you are not as experienced in that format. Next, we're going to be talking about best of one versus best of three. Again, a lot of drafters these days on Arena play best of one, but day two of the Arena Open is best of three. So I wanted to give you some tips. Again, using the same format because I enjoyed it. Compared to best of one, best of three is slower because it doesn't have the Arena hand smoothing algorithm, and so it's going to lead to slower gameplay, but just because there's not going to be as many just perfect curve outs. Second, it requires sideboarding, and so I have a sub point here. If you are new to sideboarding, these are three ways that you can consider sideboarding. First, specific answers. Specific answers are, oh, my opponent played a flyer. I'm going to side in my card that only kills flyers. Usually you would do it more complex than that. Like, oh, my opponent played 4 or 5 flyers. Okay, I'll side in my card that kills flyers. Or, oh, my opponent played an artifact that I just couldn't beat. I'm going to side in my card that only kills artifacts, and maybe I couldn't afford to main deck because I thought it would be too niche. That's the sort of specific answer I'm talking about. Next is a strategy shift. You can do something like, oh, my opponent played a very aggressive deck. I will side in my 0/4 wall creature that can't attack. Doesn't really fit my game plan all that well, but I just know that if I survive to the late game, I'll be able to outgun my opponent, and so I just need to make sure I side in an early blocker so that my opponent doesn't run me over. Or, oh, we're playing a mid-range battle, my opponent's not going to be pressuring me, I can afford to side in this extra 2-for-1 card that's going to maybe make my opponent discard 2 cards, or things like that. So you can shift your strategy slightly to adapt to what your opponent's doing. And then finally, you can sideboard to make stat shifts in your deck. So maybe your opponent plays a few creatures that all have 1 toughness, so you're willing to side in a card that makes a couple of 1/1 tokens, or things of that nature. Or maybe you're the one that played a couple of 4/1s or 3/1s, and your opponent played a bunch of cards that have like are 1/1s with value, or that punish 1 toughness creatures, and so you decide to take those cards out of your deck. So that's a stat shift. So that's just the basics of some sideboarding stuff. It's a very complex topic, but that's just the basics. And there's obviously plenty of other ways to sideboard as well, but those are the main 3 that if you've never sideboarded, just keep those ones in mind. And then next, compared to best of one, best of three requires more saving of answers for specific threats. Because you get to see a lot of your opponent's deck over the course of 3 games, you're going to be able to leverage this fact and remember what cards your opponent played in the first 2 games or the first game, and then remember to save your removal spell for those cards. So if your opponent plays a bomb rare dragon or something, you might be like, well, I have this removal spell, I'm taking a little bit of damage now, but I know that if my opponent plays this dragon, I need to have this answer. So you need to make sure that you can sometimes save your answers for specific threats, or maybe you have to use your counter spell on a certain card, or make your opponent discard things, or you need to make sure you save your answers for the specific threats that you know your opponent has. And then finally, best of 3 makes combat tricks or surprises worse, because over the course of the match, your opponent is going to know to expect these cards. So if you blow your opponent out with a combat trick in game 1, the odds of you being able to do that again in games 2 or 3 are much lower, because your opponent has seen that card in your deck, so they know to play around it. Whereas in best of 1, you're always playing against a new opponent who has an unknown deck. In best of 3, you're playing against known cards sometimes, and so you can play around combat tricks more and make those surprise cards a little bit worse. Anyway, that is going to do it for this Arena Open guide. I really do hope you enjoyed it. Remember to hit that thumbs up button, like the video if you enjoyed it, comment with your questions, and subscribe for more draft content. Also, if you did make it all the way till the end of the video, leave hashtag open season to let me know, because it's always great to see which viewers made it all the way till the end. If you would like to support my content, you can do so via Patreon, patreon.com/NicolaiBolas. It is a place where you can go to give back to my channel, help me continue making these videos, and gain access to some cool rewards in the process. I'm truly grateful for all of the patrons in that community, and it really does make a big difference in helping me make all of these videos. If you're interested, you can find a link in the description down below. In the description, you can also find links to the NicolaiBolas Discord server, the NicolaiBolas articles. I just published a new one with 5 tips for Neon Dynasty draft, so if you want more content in the written form, you can find it there. You can also find links to NicolaiBolas merchandise, NicolaiBolas Twitter, my Twitch stream, and all sorts of stuff in the description down below. Anyway, that is going to do it for this one. I hope you enjoy it. Best of luck in the Arena Open, and I will talk to you next time.